Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am ManyNinjas. As promised in my last Battle of Z video, here's going to be a mission from the Saiyan arc, but on the villain side, where we are going to actually demonstrate the giant battles, otherwise known as the Great Ape battles for the most part. This particular mission unlocks after you beat Vegeta on the normal story arc missions, and actually have to play against the Great Ape version of Gohan, but as the villain characters. You can't actually select any of the regular Z fighters for this particular mission. Subsequently, most of the giant fights, which the Great Ape fights go under, work under a certain set of rules, being, for the most part, you're facing off against just the one giant bullet, thankfully. Honestly, the giant enemies, like the Great Apes, are enough on their own for the most part. And it's between you and your three other assistant characters in order to take this giant foe down. Generally how this sort of mission works is you're facing off with one giant foe. Your entire team has a set of lives or retries in order to get through the battle. And if you run out of community lives, you end up losing the mission ends in failure, and it also ends in failure if the timer in the upper right corner runs out without you having completed the mission. Your giant foe here is able to knock around all of your characters with general ease. Most of them have this yelling attack that will actually pretty much stun you out of whatever you were doing previously, and basically anything that the large enemy does can knock you around. But on the right side, as we just did the legs there, if you happen to break apart any of your character or any of your giant opponent's limbs, it'll cause them to go into a stun state for at least a few seconds, in which your entire team can spend wailing on the enemy's main health in order to try to get as much damage in as you can, without any fear of repercussions or kind of getting beaten around. Breaking limbs apart is kind of a crucial part for this sort of mission, because that will be the only way you'll actually gather enough energy in order to start powering up your sword characters. As you can see, once you broke that first energy barrier, the actual key or just general power bar below the character's health increased a bit. That's a general mechanic that actually applies to all missions, but for these boss battles, for lack of a better term, it's really important to build up your bar as much as possible, as well as keeping your partners alive, because you all only have a certain amount of lives to work with after all. For these kind of boss battles, you need to keep an eye on four separate things: the enemy health, your own team's health, the timer, and how many retries you have left. For your enemy's health, if you get any enemy part that has basically on the verge of breaking down, you really want to focus on that lane in order to get your enemy into a stun state, and just really use that opportunity to wail on them as much as you possibly can. In terms of your character's health, which is technically attached to the retry, if they get knocked out, you have a limited amount of time in order to try to revive them, in order to save yourself a retry, because as later missions will come up, while the bosses themselves will follow the same general pattern, you will have a lot less retries to go along with. In the case of, I believe, the third or fourth one, like Hildegarn, or however that's pronounced, I've seen teams where they basically give you no retries to work with, so it's even more important to keep your own team alive on its original life as much as possible, when you really don't have that much to go with. Probably one of the biggest concerns is the actual time for any of these given missions. In terms of the giant ape fight, this one as just a kind of a test one, I never lost this mission. Because I actually got beaten up and lost all my retries, but because I ran out of time. That's probably your biggest threat, just because if you're trying to really break down some of the parts, it gets really time consuming, and you honestly don't have that much clock to work with. I also want to note that while the Vegeta version of the Great Ape fight is actually fairly easy to get through, all the later ones are actually considerably more difficult as they go along, because they aren't actually part of the main story, and thus they want to really challenge you more for those ones. And this one, which is unlocked actually directly after the Saiyan arc gets finished, I'd say is honestly a good deal harder than the original Vegeta fight, which was a cakewalk for the most part. In this one, I actually had to bother equipping the characters with a little more item cards just to get through, because otherwise I wasn't actually dealing enough damage with the time limit in order to win within the time parameters, I would actually lose by a timeout a few times. While the boss battles are generally pretty fun here, just one of the pet peeves I have personally about the way the setup, which is really being demonstrated and enforced right now, is that once your partners get to the point where they get knocked out, they get knocked out after that again and again really easily, because you only give them back a quarter of their health when they get revived. As we're at the tail end of this particular fight, I spent more time reviving my partners than actually doing damage to Great Ape Gohan. Especially with how easily they get wailed on. Well, at least on the bright side, which is honestly a point I kind of forgot to bring up earlier in the videos I've done for this particular set so far. The general audio and all the fun recordings they've done for this particular game are really nice. Especially for scenarios where technically the characters shouldn't have been around in order to have any conversations with some of these people. The lines that Nappa and Raditz have had for this particular boss fight. The fact that Yamcha has a response craving vengeance against Cybermen as a whole. Although technically the one that blew him up is already long gone. It went with him when he got blown up. I have to say the voice work, the voice and audio work really for this title are pretty top notch. Although that being said, there are a few instances with certain characters where, because of the way their moves get used, you'll hear certain clips way too often. Particularly notable when you get to unlocking Super Saiyan Goku facing him off during his pursuit move. He'll tell you he's very mad way too often. But that's something you just kind of get used to after a while. All in all, still having quite a bit of fun with this title. And if anything else of particular interest comes up in some of the later missions which I haven't shown off at this point, I'll be sure to bring them onto the channel here. Speaking of which, I haven't recorded anything yet, but also once I finally do get to testing around some of the online stuff, that will definitely be popping up for at least a video or two, just to kind of show how that goes. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, with that, the mission's now wrapped up. Let's see what rank I got here. Okay, SS, not too bad. Trophy for good measure. And now look at it, just about out of time, folks. Thanks for watching. We'll be probably putting out new Retro Ninja Gaming in the near future. And I'll catch you all next time.